I'm Reverend Pamela Purtle. We're so happy to have you with us. And yes, I need my reading glasses because it's very hard for me to see your beautiful faces when I'm not wearing them. So when you see me without my glasses, I'm either not reading or I don't see you very well. But at any rate, we are happy to have you all here with us for part 2 of welcoming a woman pastor. I want to thank you all for showing up and having your lunch handy. Take a snack, get a drink of water, some juice or something, and enjoy this conversation. We look forward to you participating with your questions as well toward the latter part. On today, our whole project and our purpose of having these lunch and learn sessions is to provide an opportunity to share valuable information with the church. On today, we're focusing on the onboarding process. To offer support for clergy and congregations. We also do these sessions to provide information for resourcing, for referrals, places you can go to get more information if needed. We do this also because we want to help promote teamwork and collaboration within United Methodist Church, particularly as it pertains to women and our supporters. We also hope that by having these sessions, we can create a much more positive church community. And finally, we hope to boost morale and foster more relationships among us. On today, our General Secretary, Dawn Wiggins-Hare, is unable to be with us. She has a situation that she must attend to. And I'm sure you all understand that sometimes we just can't be in more than one place at one time. But she will be viewing this session in its entirety at a later time, probably this afternoon, and sends her best wishes to all of you and thanks you all for being here with us. I have along with me Jen Meadows. She's our Director of Communications. We thank you so much, Jen, for being here, manning the webpage and making sure that all of you get in okay. And if you have any technical issues, please feel free to reach out to her through the chat box and tell her what your concerns might be. She's also working with our agency in terms of making sure you get these notices. So if you're having challenges receiving this information in your particular annual conference, please, by all means, put that in the chat box so that she'll know. And she will be able to reach out to your annual conferences and your communicators there as well. So let me just begin with a brief prayer before we begin, and I'll introduce our guest. Gracious God, we thank you for this time of gathering. We thank you for this time of sharing and caring. We ask that you be in the midst of this conversation and help us to learn and grow and go further in you. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. So let me start off by introducing Alice Williams and Claire Bowen. Alice hails from the Florida Conference and Claire from the North Atlanta Annual Conference, I believe I have that right. And both of these amazing, amazing people have done such phenomenal work with regards to the church at large. But more importantly, one of the things that I find very interesting is how they've used their professional background in human resources, organizational development, strategic planning, and many other areas to bring their level of expertise to the church and allow us to get the best practices that we could possibly have for how we can interact and engage with one another in a more positive way. In particular, they're involved in the process for helping clergy be onboarded at various congregations. Now, let me tell you, their work is not limited to just working with women clergy who are being onboarded. However, because of the work they do in onboarding, they're excellent professionals in being able to provide us with insight on how we can make this process of onboarding, receiving a new pastor, as seamless and successful as possible. So I'm going to just simply turn this session over to you two and let you all begin. And at some point when we get near the end of our session, we want to just have a little bit of time for questions and answers, if you don't mind. Thank you, Alice and Claire.
Thank you, Pam. Alice, I think that I'm kicking this off, and then we've got a dance going here. So I'll start just by saying thank you for having us again. Alice and I have enjoyed partnering over the past few years because we find ourselves similar and different. We're similar in that the way I first met Alice was she was in a meeting where I had a friend in the meeting who texted me and said, there is a woman in this meeting who speaks your language. And I texted back and I said, what language is that? And this friend said, corporate HREs. And by that, I think what he meant was that we both love leadership development. We both love coaching people to be all God created them to be. Right before this started, I drank some water and it went down the wrong way, of course. I think we like helping pastors in the new appointment process. As an itinerant system, you enter that time with them, and we both love doing that. And we both love coaching leaders for more self-awareness. But I think we especially connect in that we both love opening doors for women. Or as I say to myself, if I have learned anything about navigating a male patriarchal world, please God, remind me to send the elevator back down and pick up many other women. So Alice and I are also similar in that we are both laity and we are both lifelong United Methodists. As Pam said, I'm in the North Georgia Conference, headquartered in Atlanta, and Alice is kind of a transplanted but longtime Floridian who's in Orlando. We can talk United Methodist Church 24/7, or as my husband says, Claire, I love the United Methodist Church on Sunday, not every day and night of the week. So can you find another subject? And sometimes it's hard. And I think when Alice and I get together, we love to talk about how we, in our own small way, can help, especially women in the United Methodist Church. So I've always said that, isn't it interesting when you look at the population of the world, it's about equal, that God created about the same number of men as he did women. How amazing, with all that randomness out there, that we're about equal. And I don't think that's by accident. I think God is telling us to share the stage, share the light, and collaborate and do it where there's more balance in the world. So today's topic is not about Alice and Claire, but welcoming a new female pastor. So now I'm going to turn it over to Alice, who'll kind of set the stage of how we'll do this.
You know, Claire, it was funny at that same meeting, I had somebody say to me about the same thing, is there's a woman here that you've got to meet. You all just are, you know, you talk the same language kind of thing. And sure enough, when we did meet, it was one of those, I believe it's a God thing. I'm just going to claim it for what it is. And, you know, as we think about this work, both Claire and I have had the opportunity to work with women who are transitioning into new congregations. For some, it may be the first time that they've ever had a woman. There may be other intersectionalities such as race. It may be age. It may be any number of things. And we have seen it go well, and we've seen it not go well. And I'm sure those of you who are on this call have, if you've been in the church for any period of time and have had experiences, you've probably seen transitions that have gone really well and those that hadn't. In the corporate world, it wasn't that much different. And so what we wanted to do was to bring today some more thoughts around the things that we've seen that have gone well and the things that we've seen that haven't. So that's really what we're going to do today. And it'll feel a little bit different because we're just going to have a casual conversation, kind of an interview, if you will, with each other. And then we're going to open it up to you all for questions. The last session, I encourage you to go back and look at it. It had more nuts and bolts to it. This is going to talk a little bit more about maybe some of the nuances and some things that you might want to think about, and maybe some tools that are available. I know that our audience is varied. Some of you are pastors, and you may be experiencing and walking through a new appointment. And so we hope that this will be helpful to you. Some of you, I'm hoping that there's several of you that are laity. Perhaps maybe you sit on the SPRC, or perhaps you sit on the admin council of your church, or maybe you're just someone who's engaged in the leadership of your church in some way, not necessarily in a specific role. hopefully by hearing these things, it may be able to assist you in helping through that transition to make it successful. And then for those of you who may be DSs or even bishops, I know there are a couple of bishops that'll be looking at this later on. Our hope is too that these tools and resources that we talk about will be some things that you'll be able to use. Now, I am very much aware that we are coming into college football season, and I have to be honest with you that perhaps it's my Southern upbringing or whatever, I don't know, but that is a thing for me. I do enjoy watching college football. Whether there's fans in the stands or not, I enjoy watching college football. And I am reminded that I've heard it from more than one coach that the best offense is a good defense. And so today we're going to talk about some things that you can do structurally to help create that good defense and good offense to be able to make transitions work a little easier. Claire, before we get into the questions, I am reminded too that when we were first talking about this, you said, there's three kinds of folks that pastors are likely to meet when they come in. Do you want to talk just a moment about that or share a little?
Sure. I think that some see the new female pastor as a welcome change. They're excited about a female voice in the pulpit, about a female leader. I find the staffs are especially welcoming. I think there's some that are seeing it as an unwelcome change because it's somebody different from who they are. So it doesn't affirm me enough. And then some that are just skeptical and we will play wait and see. So, I think it is a mixed bag. Would you agree, Alice?
I absolutely would. And I think the thing that's important for if you're the pastor going in is to know that you're going to encounter some of all three of those folks. And it may vary by congregation as to, which bucket is fuller, right? Where you have more in one area than the other. But I would say to you that it's important to put yourself in their shoes. And what I mean by that is begin to think about, which bucket might they be in? Why might they be in that bucket? And then you might want to think about a time where you have encountered someone new who might have been different from you. And Claire, I know you just recently went through a new pastor coming in, and we were even talking about that even both of us, we encounter these feelings too, right?
Yes, absolutely. My church had a Jamaican female appointed to our church several years ago, and her accent is different. Yay. But I'm one of those that likes, the new. Others, it took a while to get used to that. My church is very white in the city of Atlanta, and we have a new male African-American associate, and he's wonderful, and we feel lucky to have him, and he preaches different than our white associates have, and yay. But I wonder how everyone on the pews is responding, and I think that there's a patience and a time and a welcoming of that we all have to go through.
And we got to be aware that no matter who's coming in to do whatever change it is that we're encountering, that people are automatically going to go to one of two places. And it's a natural thing that we do, right? It's just we're hardwired for this. We're either going to judge them harshly because it's going to look and feel different than something that we're used to, or we're going to allow ourselves, and if I'm hoping that this is the case for most people, but that we'll be mature enough to allow ourselves to be open and curious about them, maybe their style, their experience. Why has God brought them to this place at this time? And why are you, as followers of Christ, why are you in this place at this time as well? What has God got in store for you throughout this process? And that could be whether you're the pastor, that's whether you're laity, that's whether you're the DS involved in it. I just wish that we all could start to develop that mindset where we allow ourselves to be more curious and willing to see this is a door or a window that God has opened. Let's see where it's going to lead us and take us to. So Claire, as you think about being a new female pastor coming into a new church setting, what would be some of the equipment that you think would be helpful to have?
So it was fun when you and I were talking about this and you asked me that question, like, how do you equip yourself? And it made me go to a strange source, but it's one that has been very helpful to me. There is a therapist named Terry Real in Boston, and I think he's brilliant. And he's always talking about navigating tough interpersonal landscapes in water. And I think a new first-time female pastor to a church is navigating some interpersonal landscapes and waters. Terry says that you need 2 pieces of equipment, and this will sound strange, but I like it. He says you need a mosquito net and you need a wetsuit. And let me say more about those. He says you need a mosquito net because somebody's going to come up to you with a judgmental comment. I'll give you an example. Honey, your voice when you read the scripture is much too animated. Now, George, who was here before you, was much more sober and dignified when he read the scripture. And the scripture kind of demands that kind of approach. So when you hear that, many times you react first with your stomach. I usually have a whoosh kind of in my inner body before my brain kicks in. Your face can go red with emotion and you're trying to smile. It's been the weapon of women for a long time, our smile. But Terry Real says you need a mosquito net for self-protection and that you let the mosquito comment go ping on the net. Why? It may just be about the speaker. So at the end of my bathtub in my home is a small wooden plaque with a little piece of rope that's hanging, and it says on it, it's not about you. I bought it, so it doesn't say Claire, comma, it's not about you, but that's what it means. Why? I'm a feeler on the Myers-Briggs, and I take everything to heart. So my mosquito net needs to work overtime. So how does this mosquito net work? So this animated voice comment about scripture reading is a real situation. And the pastor came to me and shared it. And my first question was, do you believe that's true? And she said, not really, but I don't want to discount it completely. And so this mosquito net keeps her whoosh from dominating, her reaction. I said, do you have trusted people? And she said, what do you mean? And I said, people that you could ask their opinion. Do you have a group? And she said, well, I have this parents' council of 12 people. And I said, why don't you go to that meeting with 12 index cards, 12 matching pens, and hand them out and say to this trusted group, how do you feel about the way I read scripture? I really am interested in your opinion. I've been told that it can be too animated and not come across as pastoral. And I'd like you to anonymously tell me what you think and then hand it in. And then we'll move on with our other agenda. And I just want to thank you up front for your honesty. And so she came to me and she said, so 12 people said they liked it. 2 said they were surprised at first, but now they've grown to count on it. And I said, so that mosquito can just fall at the net. That was not about you. That was about the person. So the pastor got feedback and, dealt with it in a way that, it's not about you. Let me give you one more example. a pastor got feedback from the staff that they did not give enough pats on the back, enough appreciation for a job well done. And the pastor came to me and said, I'm mad. That's just not true. I said, so that's a mosquito on the mosquito net. Who do you trust that you could ask what they think? And this pastor said, my spouse. I said, well, go home and check it out. And here's what the spouse said. Oh my gosh, yes, I agree. You are praise averse. So now that mosquito is one you can let in. Its sting is now gone. And you have more balance to deal with it. And it can actually be a friendly mosquito at this point. But you have checked it out with a trusted source. This pastor said, so what do I do about that? And I said, well, I got that feedback one year from my older daughter who had moved away and said I didn't give her enough positive strokes. And I actually set a calendar notice to myself every week to send Kate an affirming email. Do it for yourself, you know, intentionally walk around and give people praise for a job well done, not false sort of stuff. So the second piece of equipment, the wetsuit, it's similar, but the wetsuit is to contain your whoosh and help you not react. What is said quickly in anger, in reaction, can sometimes take too long to overcome. I find that pastors are usually very good at this, but they shove it down, and that can be unhealthy. So let me give you an example of the wetsuit. So a conference in the United Methodist System instituted a new performance appraisal system. And they wanted the Staff Parish Relations Committee to rate and appraise their pastors, send it in, and the pastor would get a computer printout. The pastor of this church called and said, I have read my reviews from my Staff Parish Committee, and I have come to the conclusion none of them have a clue about this job. I said, you know, you may be right. We're guessing at all you have to do, us laity. And he said, no, that's not even the worst of it. Based on this feedback, I have to write a covenant with them about how I'm going to change based on their feedback. And he said, and there's a deadline, and I've got a staff parish committee Tuesday. And so I want to start by telling them about the job and letting them know what a gap there is between their understanding of this job and reality. And I said, you know, I wonder if there's any way we could postpone that. You know, the wetsuit still has frigid water in it for him. And so I felt like he was going to reprimand the staff parish and lecture them in anger. He said, no, there's a due date. We can't postpone it. I said, you know, I bet we can. What if you had a special call meeting for staff parish for the covenant? There's a way around this rather than feeling like you have to respond Tuesday when you haven't had time to process this. That frigid water, if any of you I have tried to avoid most of my life getting in water that requires a wetsuit, but if you've ever been in one, you know that originally that water feels freezing and you think you've lost your mind to get in that water, but eventually your body temperature warms up the water that is, and it creates a barrier for you with that outside water. So this pastor waited 10 days. His water in his wetsuit warmed up, and he was able to deal with this much better. I think we're all in need of a mosquito net and a wetsuit especially when we're navigating landscapes and new territory. Finding trusted colleagues and friends to help us understand the mosquito comment and to help us with the frigid water. There's an instrument called the Jahari Window that some of you may be familiar with. It's about, what do I know about myself that others also know? What do I know about myself that maybe they don't know? But more important, what do others know about me that I don't know? And those require a wetsuit and a mosquito net. So Alice, I'll turn it back over to you. You can comment on that, but I have a question for you. I'll preface this comment with a criticism that I've received, and I think it's fair. The criticism that I've received is that in helping maybe a new pastor navigate a church where they may be the first female, they may be the first young pastor with children, they may be the first person of color, they may be the first single pastor. Variety of new first. The criticism I've received is, Claire, you help coach the pastor more than you help coach the congregation to receive them. I think that's a fair criticism. You know, I haven't figured out how to do that except through staff parish a lot of times. I think there are a lot of conferences that are doing some things. I've seen some slideshows that some conferences is doing it. And I think I'm learning as I go. I've put most of my eggs in the basket of helping that new leader versus shifting that congregation. But Alice, you may have ideas about helping the pastor and the congregation. What might you say to that?
Well, Claire, I got to tell you, having done both, the adventuresome side of me, I have used mosquito netting and I have used a wetsuit, and I will tell you that they're great metaphors. And it's the kind of thing too that I think applies to the congregation. And here's what I mean by that. As laity, we're quirky. Let's just call it what it is. You know, we have in our mind the way we think church ought to be. That doesn't always necessarily, I think, align with maybe what Jesus intended for it to be. But we have this notion of what we think it ought to be, and we have a notion of what we think our pastors should be. And I'll even go as far as to say, in pastors, I think it's true too that you have a notion of what the congregation should be and what you would say the role of the congregation is and the role of leadership. The biggest thing that I find is that, kind of like the wetsuit metaphor, y'all got to warm up to each other. There's got to be a time where you give each other some grace and space. Use your mosquito nets, right? But then allow yourselves to warm up to one another. Don't expect it to happen overnight. It takes time to make it work. Now, there are things that you can do to help expedite that. We're going to share a little bit further on one tool that you might want to use that can help speed that time frame up. But it's not until you start to begin to form relationship with people that you really can start to truly begin to look past those stinging things that you might have as mosquitoes getting at you, and getting into truly beginning to understand each other. So yeah, one of the things that I am a big fan of, I'm a big Brene Brown fan. And if you've not listened to her podcast on the power of vulnerability, I encourage you to do so. It's really quite good. And that's really where I wanted to spend a moment or two. I think congregations need to give themselves a moment to be vulnerable, even before the pastor comes. And by the way, this could be something that the previous pastor, the outgoing pastor, can do. They can challenge the congregation to do that as in one of their closing sermons as they get ready to leave. It is something that staff parish can help the congregation do. It's something the admin council can do. It's something the lay leader of the church can do. But it is to challenge the church to take a moment, just stop action. And let's talk a little bit about how we're feeling about this change. I mean, really talk about it. You know, what are some of the things that you're concerned about? What are some of the things that you're afraid of? What do you feel that you might be losing? And just have some just general conversation about it. You can't accept something new until you're ready to let go of something old. And so in order for people, congregations, people in the congregation to be willing to be able to, embrace a new pastor coming in, they have to be willing to let go of some of what's happened. And that doesn't mean to let go of the legacy or the rich history and tradition. You don't have to do that so much as allow yourself to be open and vulnerable to something new coming in. Now, there's a couple of thoughts about that. If you want people to be authentic with you, and incoming pastors, this is really, really important. If you want people to be authentic with you, you have to show your authentic self to them. Trust breeds trust, right? Honesty tends and openness tends to breed that among each other. A couple of things that I would encourage you to think about as you're thinking about vulnerability is first off, the trust piece. Where are you on the trust spectrum? We're all kind of leaning one way or the other. Either we give trust freely until it's proven that you can't, or trust is earned. And where you are on that spectrum really can make a difference as to how you approach people. So I think it's a really powerful thing if a pastor is willing to talk about things like, this is because of my experiences, or, this is new to me too. And being able to say, I'm as nervous about this perhaps as you all are, or I'm excited about this. I'm confident that God has brought me here. There's none of that concern. But yeah, this is a big step for me too, just like it's a big step for your congregation. So again, cultivating that notion of being vulnerable, of sharing kind of where you are. And then I'm going to say to you too, put yourself in that other person's shoe. We used to call it jumping the net at Disney, meaning that, if you're playing tennis with someone, jump the net and try to look at it from their perspective. And what I mean by that, I had a church that I wanted to visit to help a pastor that was helping to make a transition. She was a person of color, and she was, going into this new appointment. And the difficult part of it is that the church was a very long-term, 150-year-old church, very much a white congregation. And when I got there, and just kind of walking around and talking with the staff parish chair, we walked through the church and just was kind of talking about the history of the church. Every room, and honestly, more so than I've ever seen in any other church, there were pictures of white Jesus on every wall, the European white Jesus on every wall. And I stopped him at one point. I said, you have a beautiful church. And there is no doubt that there's been a lot of planning into each one of the Sunday school rooms and the meeting rooms that you have and that kind of thing. And I love that you have the picture of Christ to invoke the notion of Christ's presence. But I got to ask you a question. If I'm a person of color and I'm coming in here and I walk into every room that has a white Jesus in it, how might that feel? And he goes, we never even thought about that. That wasn't even something that went in our minds. I said, those are the kinds of things that you can do. They're simple things, walk through it with a different mindset than the mindset of what you have, and be open and vulnerable to thinking differently than maybe what you have been. So I would just say, Claire, that's one big piece that I think congregations can do. I want to shift to a tool that we both have used in our work environment for years now, and we're bringing it into the church. And Claire, you've been doing this for a longer period in the church than I have. But I wanted to kind of shift into the conversation about onboarding. Can you just talk a little bit about onboarding and as a tool and how it might be helpful to congregations?
Yes, I can. I am advocating everywhere I go, if you get a new appointment, be onboarded. Onboarding is a quick way to get information about the new church, and for the new church to get good information about you, the new leader, in a very intentional and collaborative way. Somebody said when they first went through one, "Oh, that was a data dump." And I said, "Yes, it is." And they said, "Well," and then somebody who had not been through one said, "Well, how is onboarding different from listening groups or chat and choose or home gatherings or the kind of meetings we've been having to get to know a church in the past?" And I said, "Well, there are two ways it's different. One is there's a certified facilitator who navigates it for the new pastor. And the data is anonymous about who said what. So if you're sitting in somebody's living room as a new pastor with a flip chart, asking them questions, they're speaking straight to your face. In onboarding, the new pastor is out of the room when everyone is giving their opinions and their advice. Let's just take an example. Let's say there is a new female pastor appointed to, I'll call it Flat Creek United Methodist Church. And this new pastor is inheriting maybe a staff of 5 full-time people, the music person, the organist. They're really part-time, but there's a children's director, and there's 3 part-time people. And we put all 8 of those people in a room one morning or one afternoon. It's very flexible. And for 2 hours, the time can vary according to how many are on the staff. We ask questions of that staff without Mary, the new pastor, in the room. Where is she? Down the hall in her office. And so the first question is typically, what do you already know about Mary, your new senior pastor, or just your new pastor? And they'll just throw things out. She's a good preacher, write that down. She's not moving to our community, write that down. She drives a red pickup truck, write that down. She has a green toothbrush, write that down. Whatever they already know about Mary, you write down. The next question is more important. What do you wish you knew about Mary? And now they realize they can ask anything they want, and no one but the other people in the room know who asked what. And they quickly learn it doesn't really matter. And they say, well, we want to know how Mary handles conflict. We want to know how Mary feels about texting, about email. We want to know how Mary feels about LGBTQ in the United Methodist Church. We want to know what Mary's pet peeves are. So they get to ask anything. The next question starts to get a little more requiring some bravery. What are your concerns about receiving Mary? Guess what they always say when Mary's the first new female pastor, new pastor of color? She's our first whatever. So it's good. We get that out right away. And then the facilitator coaches Mary on how to respond to that. We heard Mary's too conservative for us. We heard this about Mary. This is the biggest staff Mary's ever had. Yes, welcome to the United Methodist system. That's the way we do it. Another question is, what should be her priorities? Another question is, where are the landmines we need to warn her about? A very important question is, what healing might this staff need to move on with new leadership? Or who should Mary get to know in the community and the congregation early on? And what are your deepest longings for your church? And how can you help her? So it's a big data dump with lots of data on the walls. And Mary's not in the room. Then that group leaves, and the facilitator coaches Mary to walk through the data. When in doubt, you coach Mary to say, tell me more. It's not about solving what's up there or even answering totally what's up there. It's about understanding. So then Mary leads the meeting that afternoon or the next morning. You can do one in the afternoon, the one the next morning, and it's now Mary's meeting. So there's great dialogue for her to understand what they want and what they're saying, and not make any promises she can't keep. People have said, well, what are the goals of onboarding? And I've said there are 2 goals. One is to get a deeper dive knowledge of Mary, who she is as a leader, a pastor, and who she is as a human being. And also the second goal is to get a deeper dive knowledge of the church. What is the history of this church? What is the church proud of? What is the church not proud of? What is the church disappointed in that they really want to make some changes? So Mary gets to know about the church gets to know about Mary. We turn around and then we do that with lay leadership. We may have 12 lay leaders in the room, or a larger church, we may have 40. I have learned this summer something new. in that when we have a first going in as the new pastor, I have added onboarding the new pastor to the staff parish committee. Why? This is the group that should have Mary's back. And we need to be explicit in asking them for that. How can I turn to you when I'm stuck or in trouble? How can you be my biggest cheerleaders? What does it look like to have my back? And just be very explicit with that committee. Obviously, some of our appointments are to churches with only volunteer staff. Still, let's do an onboarding. Put lay leaders who think they run those small churches, and in many ways, their opinions are heard much more. But if you have a new appointment, if you are appointed somewhere new, or if you are laity and you hear that your church is getting a new pastor, ask for an onboarding. Don't accept no. Get the new pastor onboarded or be onboarded yourself. I'm working with a church where I'm doing team building for that church, and where it's an ongoing process. And in the midst of this, they have gotten a new female pastor. And I may have said to her 5 times, I have a tendency to say things over and over if I really believe in it. Please get yourself onboarded. There's somebody in your conference that could, and she's not doing it. And Alice, I don't know where I have failed, but I want, if you hear one thing, I want all of you, if you get a new appointment, ask to be onboarded, ask your conference, call me, call Alice. We know who in that conference is certified to do it, but don't miss the opportunity to get your new pastor onboarded or to be onboarded yourself. So Alice, let me ask you, you've been doing these as well. And what have you personally seen onboarding do for a new pastor or the church?
So the couple of things, Claire, the short answer is that it speeds up that get to know you time, right? So it just helps the transition to solidify and get more solid, for lack of a better term, earlier on. But it does a lot more than that. But before I get into that, I just want to say one thing. This notion about the onboarding and stuff, I will say we are working with Cosro. So shameless plug right here. Cosro has been amazing in that they are always looking for resources to help, especially women pastors, in their ministry as well as laity. And we are working to try to put together some information so that these onboardings, if there's not someone in your area that's currently facilitated, like Claire said, let us know. We'll work with you. But at some point, we're hoping that we can possibly even get this to a place where they can be somewhat self-facilitated as well. And we're working towards that. So there'll be more information that'll be coming out, but we are looking to do that. And I want to put that out there publicly because I know there may be some questions about that. But I want to come back to what have I seen, and it speeds up that getting to know the pastor thing, and it's more than that though. Every pastor, I believe, is endowed with gifts and graces, and they also have things that they're passionate about. I have found that one of the great things about the onboarding process is that it allows the staff as well as the church to hear maybe what some of those gifts and graces are, and maybe what some of those passions are. Now, I wouldn't suggest that you go in and necessarily, if you are a person who as a pastor is someone who leans very strongly into justice ministries, and maybe you're going to a church that isn't quite there yet, I wouldn't suggest to you that the first thing that you do is, you say, we're going to revamp all of our ministries and we're going to totally shift and move into justice ministries. But what I would say is that in this onboarding, it is the perfect place for you to begin to plant seeds about where you feel your strengths are, where you have seen your ability as a pastor to help congregations maybe engage more and find their voice towards justice ministries, for example. So that would be just one example. And so what it also does is it allows your staff and your congregation to share with you as the pastor what has been some of the rich legacy that the church has been built on? What are some of the gifts and graces that this church has that you can build off of? And I'm going to be real frank with you right here. You can choose to ignore where that church has been and start to plow a new field, or you can take the field that has already been plowed for you and plant seeds in it. And here's where I'm going with that. There's a thing called Appreciative Inquiry or Inquiry that you may have heard about that basically says, you know what? It is much easier if you go into an organization and you understand what the strengths and abilities are and the gifts and graces, and you build from those than trying to start from scratch. And it may be that you would say, well, I'm coming into a church and boy, it's had all kinds of trouble. And, you know, it's actually on the blocks right now. And so we're just not really sure if it's going to make it or not. And there's just not a whole lot of gifts and graces that are there. I'm going to share with you a story about a woman by the name of Meryl Fraley. And I didn't ask Meryl if I could share this, but she's a pastor in the East Central District here in Orlando. And I don't think she would mind me sharing the story. Our DS asked her to step into that role. I believe she was the first woman pastor in this church. It is in a very interesting, prominent area in Orlando. But the church was dying. The church was, he put her in there and he said to her, Meryl, I really think that we're probably going to end up closing this church. So I need you to go in and kind of just be that transition person. There's a handful of people that are there that have been with this church for a long time, and it's probably going to be time to close. She said, I'm happy to do that, Bob. I'll be glad to do what you ask. But I just want to know, do I have your blessing that if I feel that I can find some strengths and some graces that we can build from? Are you? He's sure. He says, if you go in and you please, you know, by all means. Within 2 years, she turned that church from a church that was about to close into one that has been connected to the community in which it serves in such a different way, because she began to look at what the strengths were within the congregation, even though they were aging. And she opened the doors. And I hate to say that because here we are, Methodist, open minds, open hearts, open doors. But she began to open the doors of the church to the community that had transitioned and changed over the years, where the church had not. And that church is actually doing very, very well. Now, I'm not suggesting to you that that's going to work every time, but what I appreciated about what Meryl did was she went in and she looked at where the strengths were, and she leveraged that. So that's another piece that I think onboarding can do. It also helps to build trust. The more you know about someone, the more the water starts to warm in that wetsuit, and the more you're able to overlook with that critical eye and look more into the person's heart, is where I tend to go. And you can see what they have to bring. And that's true both for your pastor and for your staff and your congregation. Going through onboarding allows you to begin to build that relationship so that you can build trust. And then it also gives the staff the chance to collectively share what their hopes and dreams are for the church. I think it's important that pastors understand that, because if we rely totally on the pastor being the sole visionary of a church, that church is going to be in trouble, right? So you as pastor need to come in and allow you, be vulnerable, be open, allow yourself to hear kind of what people's hopes and dreams are, and then begin to assess, can we realistically live into those hopes and dreams or not? I'll share one other quick story with you. The church that I attend in Orlando, St. Luke's United Methodist, it's located in an area that's near all the theme parks. It just happened that way. The Methodist Church 40 years ago was brilliant. Our district was in purchasing a small corner lot in that area, because they knew that there was going to be growth. The theme parks were starting to open. This was before SeaWorld or Universal. Disney only had the Magic Kingdom. I mean, it was back in the day, and it was groves. It was orange groves and pine trees that were out there. There was nothing there. Now it's totally built out. but the Methodist Church was put there. And the thought was that this would be a place for maybe that environment to thrive. Well, sure enough, a lot of housing and stuff became, as the parks grew, we needed more people in the service sector and whatnot. And so that area grew. Because of that, we had a lot of people who were in the entertainment field, right? The theme parks, there were actors and actresses, all of that were, and they started coming to the church. Now, I got to be honest with you, if you know much about the entertainment industry, you know that folks, they're not necessarily churchy people, right? And quite frankly, in a lot of ways, the church hasn't always been open to people who were in the entertainment industry a lot. And so we got a pastor who had served as our associate for 7 years. She was our associate for 7 years. And the district, when it came time for our senior pastor to get ready to retire, at his urging, the district said, you know what, Jen Stiles Williams would be a great fit. So let's go ahead and put her in. Now, we had people in our congregation, even though she'd been the associate there for 7 years, that left because we had a woman now that was in the pastor, full senior pastor role. But she knew that there was a calling. And one of her passions was theater. And I want you to know that over the years that she has assumed the senior pastor role, our church has grown quite large, actually, thanks to her embracing and understanding the community that we were in, the need for the entertainment folks to have access and an outlet. And so we started a theater ministry here. And I'll tell you that COVID kind of put a damper on it because we haven't been able to do as much. But over the past 5 or 6 years, we've done probably 15 different shows that were pretty close to, they were a step above what you would say local theater was, but pretty close to what like off Broadway or some of the traveling shows. So my point to that is, who would have thought that would be an area that we would have gotten into 40 years ago when they started buying that land that was out in the middle of a grove and the pine trees. So that's what onboarding does. It helps you to understand more about what the pastor has to offer, what you as a congregation have to offer, and how, hopefully, how God can use you and help you to grow in that. So Claire, let's say that you're now coming into a congregation, it's a church, and you're going through the first part, you're kind of, the honeymoon phase is over and things just aren't going the way you think they should, or it may even feel like it's a train wreck. What do? How do you know when to raise your hand? What's your thoughts around that?
So I love something you said about going in and there may be a path already plowed, but you know that you want to do something different, and better not to plow a complete separate path, but to plant seeds within that path. I love that metaphor. I am always saying, and so I'm going to answer your question about what do you do when it gets off track, but I also proactively want to encourage people to do what I call align before you shift. We all go into church. All churches need some shifts. I mean, we're in decline. And so we're not meeting our community's needs for the unchurched. We all need new, innovative thinking. But when you go in, you have to align with what is there first and then shift them. And so I like that, the path is there. What seeds can you start planting? I'm working with a pastor who is trying to shift her church because they are not serving the community that surrounds them. And we have that as a case in a lot. Somebody called it the donut church, where people drive through the community that surrounds the church in order to get to the center of the church. But what about the community, the actual donut that surrounds the community? How are we serving that? This new female pastor is so heavily trying to align with the donut that she is now alienating the people who are driving through in order to get there. And so she's saying to me, what should I do? And I say, go back to the start, get aligned first, and then have them help you with the shift. I love Methodist theology that laity have a calling as well. It's taken me a long time to know and understand and deeply believe that this is a calling for me, just like those of you who went to seminary. And so I want her to get aligned with them and to start over. Sometimes people say, well, where would you start? And this is the way I answer. I would start at the Waffle House. Why? I love to eat at the Waffle House. And so whoever I need to get aligned with, I like to meet them for breakfast at the Waffle House. And I like to look across and say to them, thank you, and appreciate them, and ask them about what their hopes and dreams are, and ask them how we can collaborate better. So for me, it starts at the Waffle House for getting aligned. And then when it's off base, which is your original question, Alice, what do you do when the wheels are getting wobbly, you're headed toward the ditch, and you need to raise your hand? Well, this pastor said to me on the phone the other day, I think I've made a mistake. And I said, yeah, but so what? And she said, what would you do about it? And I said, I would admit it. Admit you made a mistake. And go to the Waffle House and, ask for forgiveness and say, how do we get back on base? Raise your hand, meet those people with love. Now, some people cannot be won over. I'm really realistic to believe that. Maybe not in my lifetime. They will be won over sometime, but I say at least give them 3 good faith efforts. We usually give them 1 and feel so righteous about giving them that 1 chance. No, you've got to have a pretty ongoing bill at the Waffle House. 3 good faith efforts. And then say, we're going to have to agree to disagree. A pastor recently moved the pictures of the apostles out of the Hall of Apostles. She consulted the trustees. They said they would stand behind her. And then when things got hot, they didn't. She said, what would you do? I said, I'd go put them back in the Hall of the Apostles. I'd say I made a mistake. That would not be the sword I would want to die on. We have a history in the United Methodist Church of churches. My hometown church split over a piano. We have 3 meetings over the color of the carpet. But pick your battles. The other thing I feel when things aren't going well is go back to ground zero. And for me, ground zero is preaching. We might like to think it's not the game-changing skill, but it is the game-changing skill. Good gospel preaching. And so get a presentation coach for your sermons. If you're laity, offer to pay somebody. I would love to help you understand how to meet our culture. This is a sensitive subject, pastors tell me, but I have a female coach on presentation skills for pastors in Villa Rica, Georgia. She's gold. It's not about theology. The pastor's the expert in the room, but she's the expert in messaging in a way to reach the hearts of the people on the pews. So when things are a little in trouble, double down on what's important. Prepare and prune your sermons really well. A pastor changed the hymn at the Independence Day service because it was not theologically correct. People went nuts. I'm saying, is that the sword you want to die on? Put it back. Align and then shift. Use the path that's plowed and plant new seeds there. Make big changes when you have built support. If some pastors say to me, but I'm in a hurry. We're in trouble here. I'm in a hurry. Well, I don't know. I think hurry sometimes is not your friend. and get lay leaders to say what you want changed, and then you preach it. Alice, what do you think?
Well, you know, I just want to add one piece to what you just said. I come from a church, and I am LGBTQ, and my church, in many ways, has embraced and helped me to grow tremendously. I've been surrounded and poured into by so many people, but there are those over the years, and I've been there for a long time, over the years, who wouldn't necessarily agree. But one of the things that I've noticed in my church is that it has moved to becoming an inclusive church, not because someone came in and just made it happen, but because they planted the seeds and they preached about it. So I go back to your example. You know, if there was something that you want to change in the church, to me, the bigger, more than the battle, I guess it would be the war, and maybe that's not a good analogy, but the bigger win in my mind is when people want to make the change themselves rather than you having to make the change, if that makes sense. So rather than a pastor coming in and saying, this is the way we're going to do something, you plant those seeds and you do those sermons and that kind of stuff until the congregation says, you know what, I think we're ready to make this change, or I think we ought to do this. That to me is the biggest win that you can have, because then it's come from a change it's transformational, right? It's come from a change that's happened within them. There are a couple of things I do think that are important, Claire, for success. And you touched on one, and that was that need for maybe coaches or mentors or that kind of thing. I think that's important. I would say too, never suffer in silence. You are not in this alone, right? And thanks to the Methodist Church, you know, we got a method for everything. You have DSs that you can turn to, and you can say, well, you know, if my DS is not helpful, what do? You have other options as well. You can contact your bishop's office. I do think you have to try to work through your DS at first, but if that's not getting you the support you need, then try the bishop's office. There are other things like COSRO that are available to you, and other people that would be willing to help you. So don't suffer in silence. If the wheels are falling off, and the things that we've talked about aren't working, don't go this alone. And so, Claire, talk a little bit about some of the support things. I know that you talked about the mentorship and the coaching, but what's some other supports you might?
Yeah, I want to put an exclamation point on what you said about getting a mentor. So if you are a first-time something in a church, I think you need and deserve extra support. Not just taking what has been, but coming in along with your own mosquito net and wetsuit. You're going to come in with a cadre of support. I think you need a mentor, which is very different than a coach. You need a mentor and you need a coach. Here's the difference. The mentor will say to you, don't even think about doing that. That would be stupid. Do this, try this, do this. Why? Because they've done that before. They've been in that job before. They are helping you because they're mentoring you because they know. A coach works differently. They ask the wisdom to come out of you. What do you think? How is God speaking to you about this? How can I help you be accountable to these goals you have set? How can I help you problem solve? But they are coaching you toward success. The mentor is grabbing you by the arm and saying, I'm here for you. I'm going to help you. And I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. And I think you need both. I also think you need something that for the first time in my entire career, I have one. And it has been life-giving for me. I bet most of you have had one for years, and that is being in a learning cohort or a covenant group. So a woman in 2020, March of 2020, when she saw COVID coming, said, I want to take people who facilitate things in churches, in denominations, not all of us are Methodist, and I want us to meet once a week for an hour, and I want us to help us problem solve together. And I get on there and I say, oh my gosh, here's what I'm struggling with a church. And 4 people are jumping in, giving me their creative ideas. And more than that, I get to help them, which is also life affirming. So get a mentor, a coach, a learning cohort. And then I think you need something called a kitchen cabinet. Many times you're in a small community when you get a new appointment. I mean, we have big cities, yes, but you're in a community, and the community is full of people who have been successful in a variety of careers. Maybe they own some Waffle Houses, you know, maybe they are a coach for a high school football team. It doesn't matter. Maybe they're not United Methodist, but they're successful leaders who've had to work with and through people. And you meet them maybe at Huddle House. I'd hate to give only credit here to Waffle House. Maybe you meet them once a month at lunch and say, here's stuff I'm struggling with. And for free, they love helping a pastor. Maybe some of them are retired, maybe some of them aren't. I call them a kitchen cabinet. And I just feel like everybody needs one. I also endorse Alice saying, use your conference staff. You know, there are people, well, there are people on this call right now who work in conference staffs. They're paid to help our pastors. That's the only reason they exist, is to help the local church. And if they're not doing that, then they need to go do something else, because that is where it's happening. So use your conference staff wherever you can. Alice, would you add to that?
I was just going to say too, you know, I've heard some people say, you know, I've always wanted to be in a covenant group, but I've never been invited. Or start your own. You do not have to wait until somebody extends to you, you know, something like I don't know. I did try to do like the junior league or something. You did just start your own. Just find some folks, whether they might be other pastors that are in the community, even if they're different faiths or whatever. But find a place where you feel you can be your authentic self and talk through. It is such an important thing. I loved what you said about that, Claire, and I think that's so important. We're going to go through just a last few things here. I'm just going to give you a laundry list of some quick things that I think would be helpful, and then we'll open it up for questions. Use your first 90 days wisely as you're coming into a new church. I say this to new leaders all the time, and Claire, I'm sure you do as well, but wherever you are, use those first 90 days wisely. And here's an easy way. It's the 3 L's. Those first 90 days, if you will just look, listen, and learn, spend time doing look, listen, and learn, where you're looking with a fresh set of eyes and just take it all in. Try not to be judgmental. Just try to think about what you see, what you think, it'll start to create some things in you about areas that you might want to go, but don't try to go there yet. Just look and absorb as much as you can with those fresh set of eyes. And I honestly will tell you that after the 90-day mark, your eyes won't be nearly as fresh, right? So leverage that while you can. It's a gift. Listen to what people have to say. Claire, I didn't know we had this in common, but I'm a big Waffle House fan too. So, I mean, I grab a cup of coffee, if it's Starbucks, whatever, the Panera's, whatever your thing is, but start to meet with folks. I would set up one-on-ones with my staff, absolutely. And I'm going to give you some questions here that you can ask them in just a minute. But the idea is you want to listen to what people have to tell you. It is amazing, the knowledge, the tribal knowledge that people carry with them about your church, your community, the history and the legacy that you can build on. And then learn. Be willing to allow yourself to absorb all of this and learn as much as you can within those first 90 days. Unless, this rule number 2, unless the house is on fire, refrain from making big changes. And Claire talked about that before, but build trust first, then look to implement the things that you think you need to do. Now, if there's something that has to be changed and you have to implement it, by all means, you got to tend to business, right? That's going to be something that you're going to have to do. But if you have to make those changes, make sure you understand the implications, which means think about what this might mean downstream. Think about putting yourself on the other side of the net, how other people might react to whatever the changes that you're talking about making, and then start to work to mitigate some of that. help to ease their pressure, help them to lower the angst around the change that you're wanting to implement. And you do that by communicating, making sure that you're letting people know what's going on, by being as transparent as you can, by being vulnerable with them to say, yes, I know this is scary, but we're going to get through this together, and show them that you're committed to walking through the change with them. So I think that's really important. Avoid setting the trap. This is rule number 3. Don't fall into the trap of people coming up to you and saying, what's your vision for the church? In that first 90 days, you don't have a vision. Even though you might, even though the Lord has put something so clear to you, please, 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 in that first 90 days, don't voice that right then. Give yourself some time, allow some of that acclimation to take place, and allow yourself to be vulnerable too to how the Spirit might change, within you a little bit after you've been there for a bit. Allow that to be confirmation. If at the end of the 90 days, that vision is still as clear to you as it was the first day, great. That's just confirmation, and go with it more. But there's a possibility that there might be some things that you see a little differently after you've been there for a bit. So again, I don't fall into the trap, because people are going to ask you, we're, especially for church, we're in trouble, Pastor. What you going to do to fix it? The response should be, what are we going to do to fix it? And we're going to take some time to figure that out, right? And then the fourth thing, learn what you have to work with and build on it, meaning that learn the strengths and the areas that you can look at people's gifts and graces. Learn who are the folks who are willing and offering of themselves to you early on. And then look to those who you may, need to build a little more rapport with. Folks, churches or political organizations no differently than any corporate environment would be. And when I mean politics, I don't mean government politics as much, although that may come into play. But what I mean is that their people will have thoughts, they will have ideas, and so you need to kind of understand that, right? So you're going to take some of the time to learn what some of that is before you start to make a lot of changes. Get to know your staff. Please have one-on-ones with them. I mentioned that earlier, but let me give you some quick questions. There's really only 6, and then one thing that you'll share with them when you have this one-on-one. First, you're going to ask them to tell me about yourself. Tell me about what makes your job, what you love about your job, and then what makes your job difficult. So those are the first 3. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about what you love about your job. Tell me about what makes your job difficult. Tell me about what immediate challenges you are facing. And then tell me what you need from me as your leader and pastor to be successful. And then ask them a kind of a wish question. If you could change anything in your current role or in this environment, what would it be? And just hear them out. You're not making any judgments. You're just taking information in when you ask these questions. And then the last thing, and this is the opportunity for you to start planting those seeds. Here's some of the things I need from you. This is you as the pastor talking to them. Here are some of the things I need from you. You can do this with your staff. You can do this one-on-one with your SPRC chair. You can do it with your admin council, but get in there and start to build and make those relationships. 2 more things, and then we'll open it up to questions. One is plan a check-in with your DS around the 90-day mark. Share what you've learned. And if you need something, let them know what it is right then and there, but you initiate that. Your DS is, they've got a lot on their plate. I'd love to think that they would have the opportunity to call you. If you're a DS and you're listening, you might want to plan to do that at the 90-day mark with all of your pastors who are going into new appointments. But if they haven't reached out to you as a pastor, you reach out to them and schedule time and say, listen, I just want you to know this is where we're at. This is what I'm experiencing. This is what I'm feeling, because they need to know. They need to know. And then hear what they have to say. And then the other piece with your staff, and again, you could do this also with your council or with your SPRC. You could even do it with the church if you wanted to try to do that. And either Claire and I would be happy to talk with you about how to do this. But I am a big believer that at the 90-day mark, you want to hold what we call some start, stop, and continue conversations. And it's very simple. With whatever group, whether it's your staff, whether it's with the admin council, whether it's with a group from your congregation that you want to open it up to. But what do you need me to start doing? What do you need me to stop doing? What do you need me to continue doing? And then collectively, what do we need to stop doing? What do we need to start doing? And what do we need to do collectively? So you'll get one piece is your personal feedback about what they're seeing and reacting to you. The other is what you all can do collectively. So those are some quick tips and tricks that we've seen folks use over the years. I hope that they will be helpful for you. I know Claire does as well. But what we want to do now is just hear from you. What are some of the questions, or what do you need us to maybe talk a little bit more about? And Pam, I'll let you be the moderator if you want.
I'd be happy to. We're just going to take a few minutes if there are any burning questions. I think one thing that I would like to add, and I put it in the chat if you hadn't seen it, is that all of this information is applicable to clergy no matter where you are in your level of experience. Because even if you're not the first female pastor, you could be walking into a congregation that doesn't really want a female pastor. They may have had several in the past and historically have not done very well with them, and oftentimes prefer a male pastor. And so it takes a long time for a clergy woman sometimes to be able to fully enter into that space of actually leading a congregation. So the honeymoon period is very short, and then the trials and tribulations can go on for quite some time if you don't navigate those things as well as you both described today. So I want to throw that out there as a piece that I felt needed to be emphasized, because I know a few people are saying, well, I've been pastoring for a few years, but you're not immune to some of these challenges. You just one appointment away from having to read through all of this material and listen to this session again in order to be prepared for what you may be facing. But I also appreciate how you both have provided information for lay people who are working within various levels of leadership within the local church to make sure that they're doing their part to ensure that this process is seamless and successful as well. So, are there any burning questions that we have out there? Please, if you are having some question or some ideas, please unmute yourselves, and let's see how Alice and Claire can go with that.
Amy.
Hi. So I'm wondering about how this kind of work and conversations might work in a multi-point charge, especially ones that keep getting rearranged frequently, and so don't really have a time to develop kind of a cohesive ministry as a charge.
You know, Amy, it's interesting you asked that. I've done an onboarding for a pastor who was going to a 2-point charge. And so it was 2 churches in the same area, and I'd not had much experience with that. So in all my naivety, I said, let's onboard you to both of them at the same time. Oh, wow. And so we decided to do it on a Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock, and they did a potluck, and they shared this big long table, and they all brought food. And, you know, at first their food was here and our food was here, and then it got all mixed up together. And then they were sitting in these tables and the other was sitting here. And they began to hear each other talk about what they wanted from the new leadership of their pastor. And they realized it was all the same things. And those people aren't so different from us. And it was accidental luck and naivety. If I had known more about it, I might have thought I had to do them separately. But I think the onboarding process can really help with that. That leader is torn and they want to be treated uniquely, but really we're connected in the United Methodist system.
You know, what's so funny about that is what we were built on, right? I mean, this notion of having charges. And I will say, I think laity plays I would say this because and Claire might too, because we are laity, but I think laity plays a stronger role in the charges, or they should, because the pastor isn't always there or accessible, right, in that charge. I'm working with a church that's got a 3-point charge right now, or a pastor who's got 3-point charge right now. And we were just talking about this. You can do things like the start, stop, continue. You can do things like the onboarding in all of these. It doesn't have to, as Claire said, it doesn't have to be a new appointment. The biggest and most important thing that I think you have to do with charges is you've got to keep the lines of communication open. And people need to feel that they're not just, that the pastor has an understanding of their church, It's a hard role that you play, right? Because everybody wants a piece of mom or dad. And so, you need to make sure that each one of them feel like they're the favored child as best you can.
Was there more to that question, Amy?
I think it's more just the logistics, especially when like I have a 3-point charge. I'm only 50%. And 2 of the churches were together with the previous 3rd church that closed. And so now this church has moved into that spot. And so there's just no time to kind of, for any of these charges to develop cohesion because they're constantly being reorganized. So
Yeah,
That's tough.
Yeah, some fields you plant the same stuff over and over again, and some fields every season you're going to be planting new stuff. And it sounds like you're going to have one of those fields where each one of those churches you may be planting new stuff just because of the things that they face. And that's okay. Just it's harder. There's no doubt about it. It's definitely harder. I again would encourage you, don't do this alone. Are you in a covenant group of some sort, or do you have
I'm in seminary, so I have all those folks, and I have field ed mentor and lots of pastor friends. So
okay, good. Don't go it alone. Don't go it alone.
We have a question or hand being raised by Sarah. Just want to
Hi,
acknowledge her, and then there's a question in the chat that I'll get to in a moment.
Thank you. I got moved in the middle of the first wave of the height of the pandemic last July 1st. And I followed a seminary classmate who was retiring. And I just keep finding mess after mess after mess because she claimed to be at the office, but she lived 2 hours away and apparently wasn't. So as I'm doing this, the only thing she really gave me info on was she said that they had switched to the one board model for their leadership team and that nobody was a leader. A year later, I find that it's not that they're not leaders, but I don't think they understand the one board model. And so I, by de facto, keep having everything dumped on me, and I'm ready to go shake up the table tonight. In fact, I'm headed that way, and I think they even can feel it. But I'm gonna try to be nice. But I mean, she let one person handle all the finances, and he died of COVID mid-January. And so you can imagine the mess I'm still digging out of the IRS, the state government, et cetera, et cetera. How do I lead my leadership team into actually functioning as more than just coming and sitting for 2 hours on a Thursday night? Out of 12 or 13 people, there's only 3 or 4 that really do anything. And we got at least half a year before we would change over anyway. Is there something I can say? I've cut out articles, but I don't believe they read anything I give them.
Yeah, Sarah, I'm a big fan of flip charts. I think that was my middle name in a former life. And so a lot of times it's the questions you ask versus the stuff you try to teach them and preach at them or get them to read a book. And that first question might be, what do you see as the responsibilities of being a leader in the one church model? And just ask them and write down what they say. It would be interesting to see. And then I think you have permission to say there may be a gap here. Here are some things I'm learning are about that. Where do you see the gap for you? Which are you willing to commit? How many of you feel you can commit to this? And what's realistic here at this church?
Okay, so ask them where they see the gaps, what they're willing to commit to.
And what would I commit to?
And I would just add to that too. I think I would paint the picture of where we are. So you're definitely at a point. So right now, for example, the finance piece, you're trying to dig out of that and that kind of stuff. But I think I would, following Claire's idea, I think I would paint the picture, and you can certainly do this on a chart paper, but just kind of list out there, okay, here are the key things. And maybe it's the top 4 or 5 challenges that you all are facing right now as a church. And you're going to turn to them and say, what are we going to do about this? How are we, because it can't all be me, you know, we are all in this together. How are we wanting to do this? God has called us to this point, and this is where we are. How are we going to fix this? And I would also kind of carry on to what Claire was saying too. I would say, what role do you play in this? And asking that both collectively and individually. And what role do you play? And what role do you want to play? Is there something different? And that might open the door for you all, because maybe they would say to you, either this one board plan, it looks like it can work for us, or they may say to you, you know what, this is just something either we're not quite ready for, or we're not quite ready to take on yet. Let's talk about what that might look like. You are the leader, right? You are responsible, and I think it's fair to claim that. Disney, we had a saying: you either you lead, you follow, or you get out of the way. And I believe good leaders do all three of those things, right? And so I think it's very okay for you to say that to them, is to say, I am here to lead. This is not abdicating that, but we are a church together. You all are in current roles that are part of the church leadership. What are we going to do? And then allow them to kind of take some of that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, and we did have a question in the chat box wanting to know if you all would recommend any particular books that they might want to read to just sort of better address some of the things that you discussed today.
Is the subject matter female leadership or leadership in the church, or what?
Well, I think Suzanne was trying to get to, well, Suzanne, why don't you just tell us in the chat, or just turn your camera off and talk to us?
Yes, I put in the chat that I've been cleaning all day, so I'm looking a mess right now. But I guess as a background, I'm a congregational specialist in the South Carolina Annual Conference, and I serve 3 districts. And I think generally what I'm looking for is if there are any resources in helping women transition into churches, whether it's for the first time, because in my background, I think this is my 14th year of ministry, but my 3rd year as being a conference staff, being a congregational specialist. And so whether it's, but in my previous appointment, I was the first woman, and this was a very small town church. We worshiped around 75 to 80 on a Sunday. And it went very, very well. And since then they have welcomed another 2 other women who have been pastors there. So I guess, whether it's the first time for a woman coming into a church, or maybe just transitioning in general, or maybe a woman who has been a pastor of a church for some time, and maybe just making a new start in the midst of their ministry and leadership of their church.
Pam, I bet you know the answer to that. I don't. Alice, maybe you do too, but Pam, that's your field.
Well, that is one of the reasons why we're working on this Welcoming a Woman Pastor project, because we find that there are limited resources with regards to how you can transition in the church, and how you can be onboarded, and how you can do new organizational development in the church. I think the biggest piece with regards to the work we want to do is that it's going to answer a lot of the questions that you all are raising today, and highlight a lot of the information that you've heard. So I would argue that outside of a corporate structure, and I know you both have plenty of resources with regards to corporate work, there's not a lot out there in terms of how to do some of these things in the church. However, if you're good at reading, you can translate that information and transfer it into what you're doing, and it may very well work for you. And so with that, I would say, Alice or Claire, would you recommend any book on leadership transitions, or anything of that sort that you found very helpful in your work?
I'm going to give you a couple that I have used or am familiar with. Daring Great. I told you I was a Brene Brown friend, but fan. But Daring Greatly is one of her books that I think almost every woman should read that book. It's just really good. There's a couple that are out there that they're more corporate, but I think it kind of gives you some of the same thing. Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office is one. It came out about maybe 2 or 3 years ago. That's going to talk about, the need for courage and how do you lead, especially if you're in an environment that's maybe not as friendly as you'd like. There's another book, All the Single Ladies. That one is one that talks more about the role that single women may find, because that can be a little bit daunting if you step into a leadership role and you don't have the support of a spouse or whatever. So if there's, I especially think of young women coming out of seminary who may not have be married or partnered or whatever, but I do think that that's a unique role. I'll share with you one really quick thing. I told you that we as laity can be kind of crazy. This happened with a young male pastor. I was sitting on the decom and he was sharing with us. He says, I'm new to this district. He says, but I have to tell you, he said, I came home the other night and I found 3 of the ladies from the church looking through the windows of the parsonage when I got home. And I my jaw dropped, right? I was like, what? He said, they know I'm single. They want to make sure, because he said, I caught him red-handed. I could do it. And they said, we just wanted to make sure that you were taking care of the parsonage and that it wasn't turning into like a frat house. And I thought to myself, oh, first off, what were we thinking? Who does this? But the second thing is, poor him, right? And I think that's because there were assumptions that were made because he was single and probably male. It had something to do with it. But so I do want to just point that out, that I think being single can be a kind of a difficult thing. So there's that. And being a new parent, I think, is another difficult thing for a pastor as well. And then there's the last one that I would give to you. It's one that I like. It's The Next Generation of Women Leaders, What You Need to Learn, but they don't teach you in business school, or that you won't learn in business school. And this is it's a book that's interviewing some women executives and just them sharing some of their leadership stories and what they found. So I would encourage some of those. But I wish there was a book. It would be great in seminary if they could just give you a book that would tell you how to do these things, and there's just not. But hopefully some of these things will give you at least a little bit of a heads up or hand up.
Sorry, it's Suzanne again. What was the last book? The Next Generation of?
It's called The Next Generation of Women Leaders, What You Need to Learn but Won't Learn in Business School. And again, it's just a bunch of snippets of interviews with some executives, women executives and CEOs, and some of their learnings.
Thank you so much.
Well, listen, we have kept everyone for an hour and a half, a little over an hour and a half. And so this concludes our event for today. And we thank everyone for being present. We hope that you will join us again for more of these sessions. But more importantly, let me just share that the project that we're working on now, Welcoming a Woman Pastor. Again, it's going to be focusing on all the many facets of persons who are involved in the appointment process. And we hope that you all will be able to utilize that material next year and in its most effective and fruitful way. Our next Lunch and Learn session will be held on September the 23rd. Then we're going to talk about the pay study, the salary study that just was released a few weeks ago. Many of you are emailing me with questions about it and want to know a little bit more about those numbers. And so I have asked our analyst, Dr. Michaela Bethune, who has put together all of this data mining for us, to be with us on that day. And we're going to talk about the salary study and where there's some issues with regards to jurisdictional challenges and what may be happening even in your own annual conference with regards to women clergy and those numbers. Very telling data. So I would encourage you to read that article before that session on September 23rd to familiarize yourself with it. And if you haven't seen it and you need information, please contact me at the office and I'd be happy to share that with you if you have not had it already. And that's it. I want to thank everyone for being here, but more importantly, I want to thank Alice and Claire for your time today. You guys are an absolute gift to the church, and we thank God for you. We thank you for your time on today, and we thank you for sharing your wealth of information, your wealth of knowledge with everyone who's here today. And I hope you all are blessed the more for it. Have a great day, Alice and Claire. I'll see you in a moment. You can want to take a 5-minute and then come right back in, and Jen is going to be with us. Oh, Jen posted the salary study right there for you. So there you have it. If you haven't seen it, you can click right there and get it. Thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Bye.